Simplifying a ratio of polynomials by factoring a quadratic with leading coefficient 1. Example 1, simplify. We have x minus 7 all over x squared minus 14x plus 49. So to simplify, we need to factor the denominator. The numerator is already simplified. We can't do anything with the numerator, so we're just going to factor the denominator. And so to do that, we need to find the factors of 49. And so I'm going to make a t-chart with 49, and then I need to consider how do I get 49 as what two factors will multiply to give me 49. And if the two numbers are positive, that will give me 49, but if the numbers are two negative numbers multiplied together, also give me a positive. So when I list out the factors here, I'm going to list out those possibilities as well. So I always start with 1 and the number itself. So 1 and 49 would be factors of 49. 1 times 49 gives me 49. But also -1 and -49 are also factors because when you multiply two negatives, you get a positive, okay? And then 7 is a factor of 49. 7 times 7 gives me 49. But also -7 times -7 gives me positive 49. Now the goal next is to look at these factors, and I'm going to look at which of the two factors will add to give me that middle term, that b term, which is -14. So 1 plus 49 gives me 50. That's not going to work. -1 plus -49 gives me -50. 7 plus 7 is 14. -7 plus -7 gives me -14. So those are the two factors that I'm going to use. And I'm going to break apart the -14x, that middle term, and I'm going to use the -7, those factors. So I'll have x squared minus 7x plus 49. So that -7x minus 7x, that gives me that -14x. I broke apart that -14x with the two factors. Now I'm going to factor by grouping, and so I'm going to group the first two terms together, so x squared minus 7x, and I need to find the greatest common factor between those two terms. The greatest common factor would be x, so I'm going to factor out an x. I'll have in parentheses x minus 7, and then I'm going to bring down the last two terms, the -7x plus 49. Now I'm going to group the last two terms together, 7x and 49, and I'm going to find the GCF of those two terms. The GCF would be a 7. And so when I factor out the 7, I will have a plus 7 outside of the parentheses, and on the inside will be a -x plus 7. Now, when you do factor by grouping, the two binomials need to match, and right now they don't match. They are very close to being the same. However, they are opposite signs. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out a negative out of the second binomial, and instead of bringing out a positive 7, I'm going to bring out a -7. And so when I do that, it will replace the second parentheses. I'll have an x minus 7 now in the parentheses because I factored out a -7 instead of a positive 7. Now the two binomials match, and that's what we want to happen. And then, so that's going to be one of my factors, is going to be the x minus 7. And then the other factor will be the terms that are in front of the parentheses. So it will be the x minus 7 that's in front of those parentheses as well will be the other factor. So the denominator factors to be x minus 7 times x minus 7. So I'm going to replace that with the denominator, and now I have this. So I have x minus 7 over x minus 7 times x minus 7. Notice that I have an x minus 7 on both the numerator and the denominator, so I can cancel those out. And so I'll have a 1 remaining on the numerator, and then the bottom, the denominator, will have x minus 7. So example 1 will simplify to be 1 over x minus 7. Example 2, simplify. We have y minus 6 all over y squared minus 36. So the numerator is already simplified. We can't do anything, but we can factor the denominator. So that's what we want to do here. And I'm going to rewrite it to have 0 as my middle term, my b term, because technically that is what the b would be, is 0, since there's no middle term. I have y squared minus 0y minus 36. And so since this is a difference of two squares, that's what this is called. I'm going to be multiplying the a and the c terms. And so the a is going to be a 1, the c is going to be a negative 36. And so 1 times negative 36 gives me negative 36. Now I do have a video that I've created on this topic of how to factor when you have the difference of two squares. And so because my goal is to find the factors that multiply to give me negative 36 but adds to give me that 0, I use a trick, and I'm going to take the square root of 36 because that will tell me what the factor is going to be. It's going to be a 6, but because we want it to add to be a 0, I'll have to have negative 6 and positive 6. And also, when you multiply a negative and a positive together, that gives you a negative number. So I'm going to break apart that 0, and I'm going to get y squared minus 6y plus 6y minus 36. Now I'm going to do factor by grouping. I'm going to group the first two terms together. So I have y squared minus 6y. I'm going to find the GCF between those two terms. The GCF would be a y. I bring out a y, and then I'll have inside the parentheses y minus 6. I bring down the last two terms, the 6y minus 36. Now I'm going to group those two terms, those last two terms together, and I'm going to find the GCF between those two terms. So the GCF between 6y and negative 36 is going to be a 6. And so I'm going to factor out a 6, and so I'll have y parentheses y minus 6, and then I factored out that 6, and I'll have y minus 6 in the last parentheses. So my two binomials match, which is what we want when we do factor by grouping. So y minus 6 is going to be one of my factors, and to get the second factor, it's going to be the y plus 6 in front of the parentheses. And so the denominator factors to be y minus 6 and then y plus 6, and that's how difference of two squares work. And so I'm going to replace that with the denominator, and now I have a situation where I'll be able to simplify now because everything is factored. And then notice that I have a y minus 6 in the numerator and a y minus 6 in the denominator, so those can cancel out. When I cancel those out, I'm left with a 1 on the top and on the numerator, and then the denominator will have the y plus 6. And so my final answer will be 1 over y plus 6. Example 3, simplify. I have x squared plus 5x plus 6 all over x plus 3. So the x plus 3 in the denominator is already simplified. You can't do anything. But my quadratic on the top can be factored. So I'm going to factor the numerator. So I am going to start by finding the factors of 6. And because I am trying to factor this, I'm going to include all factors of 6, and that's going to include the fact that two negative numbers will multiply to give me a positive number. And so when I do the factors, I'm going to list out the negatives as well as an option. So I always start with 1 in the number itself, so 1 and 6, and so that means negative 1 and negative 6 would also be two factors of 6. And then I have 2 and 3, and then I will have negative 2 and negative 3. Now I go through each of these factors and I add them, and I'm looking for the two factors that multiply to give me that 6, but then add to give me that middle term, that 5, the b term. And so 1 plus 6 gives me 7. That's not going to work. Negative 1 plus negative 6 gives me negative 7. That's not going to work. 2 plus 3 gives me 5. That works. So those two factors, the 2 and the 3, are the numbers that I want. And so I'm going to break apart 5x, and so I'll have x squared plus 2x plus 3x plus 6, and then I'm going to do factor by grouping. And so I'm going to group those first two terms together, x squared plus 2x. I'm going to find the GCF between those two terms, which is an x. I'm going to factor that out. I'll have x on the outside of the parentheses, and then on the inside of the parentheses, I'll have x plus 2. Now I'm going to bring down the last two terms, plus 3x plus 6, and then I'm going to group those two terms together, and I'm going to find the GCF of those two terms. And so the GCF of those two terms will be a 3. And so I'm going to bring out a 3, and then I'll have inside of the parentheses x plus 2. So at this stage, when you do factor by grouping, the two binomials need to match, and they do. They're both x plus 2's. And so that means that that's going to be one of my factors. And then the other factor is going to be the two terms that are in front of the parentheses, the x and plus 3. So the numerator factors to be x plus 2 and x plus 3. So I'm going to replace the numerator with those factors. And then notice that I have an x plus 3 on the numerator and on the denominator, so those cancel out, and I'm just left with x plus 2. And so that's going to be my answer for example 3.